brings us to our topic tonight. Our final session in the Great Economy Project is taxes, taxes, taxes. Everything else is BS. Now, that is actually a quote from Rutger Bregman, who is a Dutch historian. It was at Davos a couple of years ago. Michael Dell, the billionaire, posed this sort of what he thought was a rhetorical question. Name a country that 70% tax brackets have ever worked in. Name a high tax country. Rutger Bregman says America, you billionaire ding dong. And he goes on to say, I hear he talked about 150 billionaires flying into Davos, Switzerland to talk about climate change. And then this issue of taxes came up with Michael Dell. He says, I hear people talking the language of participation, justice, equality, and transparency, but almost no one raises the real issue of tax avoidance and of the rich just not paying their fair share. It feels like I'm at a firefighters convention and no one's allowed to speak about water, he says. Stop talking about philanthropy and start talking about taxes. That's it. Taxes, taxes, taxes. All the rest is bullshit, in my opinion. So this is from Rutger Bregman at Davos. So I think we're just going to start with a show of hands. So raise your hand if you think the economy is rigged against you, even if you're in the privacy of your own home. Just raise your hand if you think the economy is rigged against you. So if you are one of the people raising your hand, you agree with 71% of the American people who think the economy is rigged against them. So I'm going to pose a question to the chair of the Patriotic Millionaires. Morris, how do you rig an economy?
Well, that's easy, Erica. If you want to rig the economy, you start with the tax code. Let's say that two people, we'll call them Joe and Cammie Workhart, both worked full time last year, putting in 40 hours every week. Together, they made $100,000, just above average for a two-earner household. They're married. They'll file their taxes jointly. So after taking the standard deduction and paying into Social Security and Medicare, they end up with $72,300 in taxable income.
And then I just want to make sure, can everybody see their screen? I think this is okay. All right, I was just having a little problem with my screen. Okay, so taxable income of $72,300. All right, so here we want to step back and explain a couple of things. This is a chart of the federal tax brackets, and it shows how much you pay at each level of income. So everybody gets a standard deduction, and you only pay taxes if you make above that amount. We have a progressive federal income tax system, meaning you pay a slightly higher percentage of your income in taxes the more money you make. So look at this chart and you can see after that standard deduction, a married couple filing jointly will pay 10% on the first chunk of their taxable income, 12% on the bit after that, and so on and so forth until they max out at 37% rate for any income over around $693,000. Now, everybody pays, here are two things to remember. Everybody pays the exact same rate as they move through the tax brackets. And everybody maxes out at 37%, whether they make $693,000 a year or $693 million. So Morris, how does this work for the Workharts?
Let's go back to the Workharts. With $72,300 of income after the standard deduction, the Workharts will pay 10% on that first chunk and 12% on the rest, for a total federal tax bill of about $8,500.
All right, fabulous. Now let's take two other people. We're going to call them Ronald and Melanie Slump. They sit around all year long tanning on the beach. One day, Ronald clicks a button on the couple's E-Trade account and sells some stock, making a cool profit of $100,000. The Slumps would take the standard deduction and be left with $72,300 of taxable income, just like the Workharts. So they made the same amount of money, and the Slumps are going to pay about the same amount in taxes. Is that right, Morris?
Wrong. Under our current tax system, the Slumps will pay zero in taxes on that income. The Workharts worked hard all year trying to get ahead, while the Slumps, who are already rich, sat on the beach sipping strawberry daiquiris. At the end of the year, the Workharts are almost $9,000 poorer than the Slumps. So how does this happen?
So I'll tell you how. The current federal tax code taxes money differently depending on how you make it. So here's a comparison with the rate side by side. Like the Workharts, most people make ordinary income. You work, you go to work, You make money from that work, you get a paycheck, and taxes come out of that paycheck. Other people, and this is mostly millionaires, make capital gains income. You buy an asset like a stock, it goes up, you sell it for a profit. The profit is considered a capital gains. Capital gains income is taxed at a much lower rate than ordinary income. So if you work for a living, you actually pay a higher tax rate on your income than people who live off investments. But that's not even the best deal in the federal tax code. The best deal is to inherit money like Elon Musk's many children from different mothers will. So Morris, if someone made the same amount of money working as Elon Musk's kids will inherit, how would their taxes be treated?
Well, let's step back and say the workhards got new jobs singing full-time for America Sings. They are such good singers that last year America Sings paid them $12.9 million. They pay their Social Security and their Medicare, took their standard deduction. They ended up with around $12,872,000 of taxable income. They pay 10% of the first chunk, 12% of the next chunk, and so on, maxing out at 37% for all the income over around $693,000. The workhards total tax bill for the year was around $4.7 million. Now, making nearly $13 million a year is hardly reason to sink Crimea River. But how does the workhards tax bill compare to the slumps tax bill?
Well, the Slumps also had an excellent year. Mr. Slump's great aunt died and left her entire $12.9 million estate to the Slumps. Now, don't be sad. They were not very close. Now, Morris, how much will the Slumps pay in taxes on their $12.9 million of inheritance income?
Well, nothing, zero, nada. When lawmakers wrote the current federal tax code, they exempted the first $12.9 million of every estate from taxes, over $25.8 million for a couple. Once again, the workhards and the slumps took in exactly the same amount of pre-tax income, but because they earned their money in different ways, one couple by working, the other couple by waiting for someone to die, the slumps ended the year $4.7 million richer than the workhards.
All right, so that's income. We've talked about income. Now let's talk about wealth. Wealth is the total value of all of the assets a person owns.
Half of all Americans have no wealth at all. But if the ones who do, they may have some money in a retirement account or a stock market account, but the majority of their wealth is their primary residence, their houses. That is not true for most rich people.
So while rich people may own several houses, most of them keep most of their wealth in all kinds of other assets, things like stock and art and jewelry and NFT goose images owned by bankrupt cryptocurrency firms. Yes, someone paid $6 million for that weird drawing you see on your screen right now. So how are different kinds of wealth treated in the tax code, Morris?
Well, back to the workhards and the slumps. The workhards' wealth is basically their home, a lovely little house in Dayton, Ohio, with an assessed value of $250,000. Homeowners pay around 1.4% in property tax in Ohio. So for the workhards, the tax on their wealth, their home, is around $3,500 per year. They will pay that property tax every single year. The slumps also keep part of their wealth in a lovely little house in Dayton, Ohio, with an assessed value of $250,000. They use it to store their furs in the summer. Like the workhards, they too will pay property tax on that part of their wealth for a total of around $3,500 per year.
Now, the Slumps used to own more houses, but Mrs. Slump really does not like taxes. So several years ago, they sold all of their houses except for the one in Dayton. Mrs. Slump was worried that her furs would be traumatized by the move. They made $500 million on the sale of all of their other houses. And with that $500 million, the Slumps bought a small yacht, a large plane, 2 Picasso paintings, one from his blue period, a blue diamond to match, 1 prize racehorse, and 1 decorative flower pot filled with antique gold coins. Morris, what was the total tax bill on this part of their wealth?
Again, zero, nada, nothing. The work hards have wealth of $250,000. The slumps have wealth of $500,250,000. But the annual tax on their respective wealths is exactly the same.
Now, you may have thought that we broke from England and started our own country because we wanted things here to be different. But take a deep dive into our tax code and you'll hear God Save the King playing in the background. Because the lawmakers who wrote the current federal tax code clearly prefer an aristocracy. Want proof? Let's talk about one of rich people's favorite loopholes. Morris, tell us about the stepped up in basis.
Well, that's a good one. Let me tell you how it works. Say you buy stock for $1 million and sell it for $10 million. You only pay taxes on the $9 million you gained, and you only pay those taxes if and when you sell the stock. Simple enough. But what if you bought that stock for $1 million? It grew in value to be worth $10 million, but you never sold it, and then you died. At your death, the stock goes to your heirs. In the current federal tax code, when your heirs inherit that stock, poof, the cost basis magically changes. Instead of the basis being $1 million, what you paid for the stock when you first bought it, the cost basis stepped up to $10 million, the value it had on the day that you died. When your heirs sell the stock, they will only pay tax on the gains above the new $10 million basis value. $9 million of capital gains totally wiped out for tax purposes. And there's another loophole they love almost as much as stepped up basis. That one's called the 1031 exchange. Erica, tell us about that one.
Sure, Morris. This loophole allows investors to avoid capital gains taxes when they sell a piece of property if they immediately invest it in another piece of property. Let's say a developer buys a building in Dayton, Ohio worth $10 million, holds it for a few years, and then sells it for $60 million and buys 1,000 buildings with that $60 million. The developer is $50 million richer, but he still paid no taxes. If he dies, his estate will pay some estate taxes, but his heirs will inherit all of that $60 million worth of property at the new basis. That's how millionaire real estate families acquire billions of dollars of property without paying taxes. Let's think about that for a minute. On one side is a wealthy heir who never worked, who inherited millions of dollars and contributed nothing at all to running the country. On the other side are people like the workhards who go to work, pay their taxes, and do their part for the country every single day. Now, Morris, how big of a problem is this?
Well, Erica, between a third and a half of all wealth in America is inherited. And there's nothing wrong with inheriting money, of course. It's great. I recommend everyone do it. But there's no reason at all that inheritance income should be taxed differently than other kinds of income. Now, let's turn to corporations.
All right, so in 2020, if you bought a single pair of Nike socks, you paid more for those socks than Nike paid in federal taxes for the entire year. If you sent a single package through FedEx, you paid more for your delivery than FedEx paid in federal taxes for all of 2020. Morris, how does this happen?
Well, there are a lot of ways why these things can happen. One of the main ones is that the current federal tax code allows companies to pretend they do business somewhere other than where they actually do business. Let's take a company like, for example, Starbucks. Say Starbucks has thousands of stores in the United States and a few dozens of stores in Ireland. You'd expect them to pay a lot of tax in the United States and much less tax in Ireland. That would make sense. That's not the way it works. Most large companies have what's called intellectual property, a trademark or a patent, for example. Unlike land and buildings, intellectual property can be transferred to another country as fast as you can click send on email. Picture that Starbucks logo. A smart lawyer can transfer ownership of that logo to Starbucks of Ireland, who would then legally own the logo. In order to use the logo, Starbucks of the United States would have to send royalty payments to Starbucks of Ireland. The company can make the royalty payments whatever they want. If they make the payments big enough, the company will show all of its profits in Ireland, where tax rates are much lower, even though they sold hugely more coffee in the United States of America. Using this and other tricks, 55 US companies paid zero federal taxes in 2020. Zero. So here we are again. The work cards holding up their end of the bargain and everyone else shirking their responsibility.
Now, rich people and CEOs love pretending that there are really good reasons why they should pay lower taxes than all the rest of us. Their favorite reason is that they are job creators. Ooh, like they're magicians who create jobs out of thin air just by waving a little wand. In 2017, before the rewrite of the federal tax code under the Trump administration, there were lots of CEOs who insisted they would hire more people if only lawmakers would cut the corporate tax rate. They even launched a big job creators bus tour that went all over the country. The CEO of AT&T, Randall Stephenson, was one of the biggest cheerleaders of the corporate tax cut. He insisted that the correlation between tax cuts and job creation was very, very tight. Morris, is the correlation between tax cuts and job creation very, very tight?
No, Erica, not at all. You have to remember, corporations only pay taxes on their profits. Profits are calculated after subtracting expenses like payroll. So Mr. Stevenson's claim doesn't even make sense on its face. But be that as it may, maybe he was just confused. Maybe he thought he would hire more people if the corporate tax rate was lower.
Morris, I just don't think so. You see, from 2008 to 2015, AT&T paid an effective corporate tax rate of 8%. Now, that was well below the standard corporate rate at the time of 35%. And during that period, the company cut 80,000 jobs. Now, after the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, an Orwellian named bill if I ever heard one, went into effect in 2018, AT&T cut an additional 40,000 jobs. Right after they got that tax cut, an additional 40,000 jobs. And in his last year as CEO, AT&T paid Randall Stephenson $32 million. So corporate tax cuts don't create jobs. What about stock market investors like you, though, Morris?
Erica, we don't create jobs either. Investors like me pay half the tax rate of people who actually work for a living. And lawmakers justify that lower tax rate by saying investors are job creators and insisting if we raise their taxes, they'll stop investing. That just isn't true. But let me explain. For example, Apple employs thousands of people to make iPhones and computers. I am an investor in Apple. I have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of Apple stock. But none of the money I spent buying the Apple stock even went to the company. It went to other investors who happened to be selling their stock that day. People who work at Apple have jobs because of the millions of customers who want to buy iPhones, not because of investors like me. Consumer demand is the real job creator. And to be clear, investors are not going anywhere regardless of the tax rate. The alternative to investing is to stick your money under the mattress. Last I checked, mattresses do not provide very high returns.
All right, so just to summarize as we wrap up, regular working people pay twice the tax rate that millionaires like Morris pays. So even if you happen to have the same income that he has, you'll end every year worse off. And that inequality is the root of so many problems in our country. That's why inequality today is higher than it has been in 100 years, because we have broken the social contract. Deaths of despair have skyrocketed while life expectancy for large parts of our population has actually fallen. And you see, the country is more divided now than probably at any point since the Civil War. Now, to be clear, this tax issue and this driver of tax policy that is making us more unequal each and every day, more quickly each and every day, this is not a Democrat problem or a Republican problem. It's the American people versus the billionaire class that has captured the government. During World War II, the top marginal income tax was 94%. During the Eisenhower years, it was 91%. Today, it's 37%. Who's in charge in Washington has changed countless times over the last 70 years, but the tax rate for the richest people in the country has gone in one direction, and that's down. The tax code is proof enough that our federal government has been captured by wealthy interests, and they played both sides of the political aisle. But there is good news. We can fix all of this, and we can fix all of it with your help. That's what the Great Economy Project is all about, explaining to folks like you how the economy is rigged and what we can do to unrig it. So if people like you begin to use the power that you have, we can fix this thing. So right now, I want to open up to questions. If you could enter your questions in the chat, and then we're going to talk about how we can solve this problem.